The impact of First Nations treaties on non-Native people and First Nations. Introduction: Understanding treaty agreements in Canada. First Nations treaties, particularly those in Treaty 7, represent a cornerstone of Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples. These agreements were meant to secure peaceful coexistence and the sharing of lands, while providing the basis for cooperative development and mutual benefit. However, in modern times, the ongoing implications of these treaties have become a critical issue for both First Nations and non-Native people in Canada. This piece will explore the historical context of these treaties, their impact on both groups, and what might happen if First Nations hold Canada accountable for failing to uphold the terms of these agreements. Historical context of treaties in Canada. In Canada, treaties were signed with First Nations to acquire land for settlement, resource extraction, and development. Treaties 1 through 11 were negotiated between 1871 and 1921, with Treaty 7, signed in 1877, covering the Blackfoot peoples and other nations of the Central Plains of Alberta. These treaties, although varying in specifics, generally promised land, annuities, resources, and education in exchange for First Nations land rights. However, many argue that the agreements were poorly explained to the Indigenous signatories, who were often misled about the true intent behind these documents. Cardinal and Hildebrandt, 2000. The Blackfoot people, along with other nations in Treaty 7 territory, agreed to share their lands and resources with settlers, but they were not informed about the broader implications of the treaty or the full extent of what they would lose. Treaty 7 Elders and Tribal Council, 1996. This miscommunication has led to tensions and misunderstandings that persist to this day. Impact of treaties on First Nations and non-Native people. The treaties impact both First Nations and non-Native people in profound ways. For First Nations, the treaties were seen as a way to guarantee their survival and the preservation of their culture. However, the failure to honor many of these promises has led to systemic issues such as poverty, poor health outcomes, and a lack of access to the resources that were promised. Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada, 2015. For non-Native people, the treaties represent a legal framework that allows for the continued development of land and resources. However, the failure to honor these agreements has created ongoing conflicts and challenges to reconciliation. Non-Native settlers often benefit from the lands and resources that were promised to First Nations in the treaties, but these benefits come at the cost of deepened inequality and injustice. Isaac, 2012. What happens if First Nations hold Canada accountable? If First Nations people, such as those in Treaty 7 territory, were to actively challenge Canada's failure to uphold treaty terms, the consequences would be far-reaching. First, it could prompt a reevaluation of Canada's legal and moral obligations under these agreements, forcing the government to engage in genuine reconciliation and restitution. Fumoleau, 2004. Legal challenges could address issues such as land rights, resource extraction, and financial compensation for broken promises. This could lead to land reparations, renegotiation of resource development projects, or even the return of traditional lands that were never properly ceded. Burroughs, 2002. Such action would likely provoke national and international attention, drawing focus to the ongoing impacts of colonialism and the systemic neglect faced by Indigenous communities. In this process, Canada would have to reckon with its history and the reality of its ongoing commitment to the treaty process, which many Indigenous leaders argue has been dishonored. Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, 1996. This confrontation with the truth could have wide-reaching effects on the Canadian legal system, forcing changes in policies related to Indigenous governance, resource management, and cultural preservation. It could also inspire movements for self-determination and governance, allowing First Nations to reclaim control over their traditional territories. Morris, 1880. Conclusion. The importance of honoring treaties. In conclusion, First Nations treaties are not historical artifacts. They are living agreements that continue to shape the present and future of Canada. For non-Native Canadians, these treaties should be recognized as essential to maintaining justice, fairness, and reconciliation. By honoring these agreements, Canada can take meaningful steps towards righting the wrongs of the past and ensuring that future generations of First Nations and non-Native peoples can coexist in a manner that is equitable and just. As we move forward, it's crucial that the government, legal systems, and society at large hold Canada accountable for its treaty obligations. Only then can the true spirit of these agreements be realized, benefiting all people within Canadian society.